What we're going to talk about today is the challenge around when you decide to create content, saying what you want to say, and then saying what you feel like you have to say. Because there's often a fear around if you're saying what you truly want to say, one of the things that might happen is you might come off as immature or not well informed or what have you. Um, the challenge with this, it's actually pretty subjective, right? Because if we've seen that content is what draws in people to get a sense of who we are, it's actually in our better interest to share more of ourselves. And I don't necessarily mean sharing like the most vulnerable stories you ever have, that you have on hand that you've ever experienced. I still believe to a degree it's good to process those really vulnerable stories on your own, and then when you're ready to share them, you start to share them. Um, but this idea of if I say what I want to say, is it going to come off as immature? And then we can talk about some other ways of does it come off as arrogant? Does it come off as a know-it-all? Does it come off as insert adjective, insert characteristic? So I think this is a common concern, but at the same time, it's almost it's kind of thinking like worst case scenario, right? Because the truth is that, and I think it's useful to process this before you decide to commit to creating content, especially if you're a business owner or an entrepreneur. Is that if you don't decide beforehand, if you don't decide to bring awareness to this beforehand, that not everyone's gonna like you, and it could be really hard to kind of wrap your head around that and make that clear before you get started, because you would think that if your intention is right, you want to share value, you want to share education, you want to teach people things. It's like, oh, how could someone not like that? But people have opinions, and it can be challenging if you don't have the awareness beforehand that, hey, like, people might have opinions, and not might, people will have opinions. So this idea of, well, if I say what I want to say, if I teach about what I want to teach about, if I educate in the way I want to educate, what if it comes off as immature, arrogant, know-it-all? Um, you know what? It's you ultimately have to answer this for yourself, but when it comes to content, a lot more can be learned by talking through your content and actually releasing content than opposed to strictly and always thinking about it. So that's actually, in my opinion, the big nuance, the big difference between taking action in the business sense and then taking action in the content sense. Because taking action in the business sense, if you're talking about the next initiative you're going to do, the next system you're going to bring in, the next system you're going to create, the next process you're going to document, if you're just talking about all this stuff, it's not really doing it. You should let little action. But with content, the more you're talking, the more you're taking action on the content, because I've seen this happen too many times where there's so much thinking that goes involved to the content. But if you think, and you don't talk, i.e., do, it's really hard to start learning what your voice is, what you like to talk about, get a sense of what empowers you to do that next piece of content, not feeling like you're drained after you do one piece of content. It's like, oh man, I need a break. Try to find those topics that are ones that you could just keep talking about. And maybe for some of your first viewers, it'll be ad nauseum that you're talking about it. But the truth is, if you're in it for the long haul, a lot of these questions that seem really important about, like, oh, like, what if, all these what ifs that seem like, what if I'm perceived as immature if I talk about what I want to talk about, or if I teach or educate on what I want to talk about, or talk in a certain way, what if I'm perceived as immature? A lot of what ifs that seem really important, but in the long haul, when you commit to a long-term process, you'll begin to see that a lot of these things are I don't want to discount it and say unimportant, but they're much, much less important than you or are led to believe. My name is Randy Splain. I enjoyed doing this piece of content for you, and I will be talking with you in the next one.